Awesome. I would like to call this January 21st meeting of the Educational Affairs Committee to order. We will begin tonight's meeting with a roll call. Mr. Schultz.
Present.
Robin Murphy, present.
William Mohan, present.
Zachary Nice, present.
Charles Burdell Williams, present.
Ross Whiting, present. Do we have any of our board members online? Not at the moment. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. We're good. All right. I at this moment, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Mr. Burdell Williams,
Second.
second, Ms. Murphy. The minutes are approved. At this time, I would like to turn the meeting over to the Office of Education. Tonight's meeting will include a presentation and discussion of the comprehensive planning process and priorities and goals of the comprehensive plan, and a presentation regarding artificial intelligence in the Cheltenham School District. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We are happy to be here. We always ground ourselves again in our essence, also in our mission and our vision, making sure that we are centering everything that we do in the district to our essence of belonging, becoming, and excelling, and also making sure that we honor our vision and our mission. In particular tonight, I'd like to focus a little more on the mission of the Cheltenham School District and this idea that we would like to provide inspiration and resources for every student to achieve academic excellence and pursue their highest potential by creating an equitable and inclusive community that fosters social and emotional well-being and a passion for learning. You will see tonight in our comprehensive planning portion that we absolutely have been attuned to our vision and mission in planning for the comprehensive plan. And hopefully that this alignment will give us some more succinct steps to take in terms of how we'd like to proceed as a district. So tonight, we will review the comprehensive plan process, focusing heavily on the priorities that arose out of the comprehensive planning process and the goals that go with those priorities. And then we have some members of the Office of Education here who are going to present around AI in Cheltenham, AI meaning artificial intelligence. The Office of Education, Rachel Girman and Tami Flood in particular, have undertaken the gargantuan task of keeping us up to speed around artificial intelligence, and they have been exploring what other school districts have been doing as well. So they have a presentation ready for us for this evening. But we will actually start with the comprehensive plan, and I'll try and keep this shorter rather than longer because I know everybody is excited about the AI portion. But the comprehensive plan in particular, we presented a short summary in our November Education Affairs Committee meeting around the process that we were going to undertake to assemble this cycle's comprehensive plan. And of course, this cycle will be commencing in 2025 and will be ending in 2028. Per Pennsylvania law, every 3 years, school districts are supposed to do a comprehensive plan, and that comprehensive plan is focused on continuous school improvement and is supposed to drive the school district forward in terms of addressing challenges that the school district may have. Our plan is actually due on March 31st of 2025. So we are right in line with this planning process to submit time. In addition to the comprehensive plan, there are a number of state required reports that must be submitted simultaneously. So the comprehensive plan itself is kind of like this overarching umbrella plan, but then there's other plans that are attached to it and assurances as well. Bless you. So we actually we have actually been working through an induction plan as well, a professional development plan, and then some assurances. So there are assurances around our gifted education plan, our student services plan, and really too around our academic requirements and assuring the state that we are teaching all of the students the standards that we should be teaching and at the grade levels we should be teaching them. So all of those things have been occurring as well. And I want to thank Dr. Pimental in particular. He has run subcommittees around the gifted education plan, the induction plan, and the professional learning plan. And he has concluded all of that work as well with those committees and put everything into our plan portal for us. So the comprehensive plan expectations that we've embedded in our process are set forth here, and this slide is actually from November as well. But Heather Scriven and Tracy Horn from the Office of Education have been instrumental in this process because they actually took a look at the entire arc of what was required for the comprehensive planning process, and they put together the logistics and also the activities that we undertook as a comprehensive plan steering committee, including a number of meetings where we examined different data sets, Google Forms where after the examination of the data sets in smaller groups, we were able to list strengths and challenges and really think about what rose to the top for us. And also a process in which they delineated what we should focus on in terms of priorities. So what you're going to see tonight came out of that process. This is not something where, one person sat down and dictated this. This was a number of stakeholders that came together over a series of meetings and looked at some data. And it was really important because we had a number of different committee meetings and a number of stakeholders involved. We wanted to actually include updates in the educational affairs meetings so that we could keep the public apprised as well and the board apprised of the process. But you can see that not only did we have our steering committee for the comprehensive plan, but there were also subcommittees and we had teachers that supported the process. During early dismissal days, they would jump on and really support information and data around the related academic sections of the plan. And the Office of Education too has been very supportive in this process, and they will primarily be responsible for the action planning as related to the goals that have come from the comprehensive planning process. So again, we wanted to make sure we were sharing out with the public, but just to keep you as a board informed of the requirements, there is a 28-day public comment period that must occur before we actually present the finished comprehensive plan to the board for approval. So part of the timing of this and making sure that we backward mapped into the calendar appropriately was making sure that we had time for this 28-day public comment period and the posting requirement. So the plan at this point is to make sure that we post this by the end of January so that we can have the posting and the public comment period through the month of February. We can take those comments into account, then come back to the board for the legislative meeting with a fully encompassing draft. So the Office of Education will take the lead in that posting and also any revisions necessary from the comments we receive from the public as well. But wanted to let you know what the plan was in terms of making sure that we post this appropriately. And then last but not least, the data piece of this. And so interesting because we're in AI and education tonight, and this is so on topic. I generated this icon using AI. I did. I asked for something very specific and gave it to me. But when we were actually making decisions around the comprehensive plan goals and priorities, we looked at a number of data sets. We looked at the Future Ready Index data over time that has been provided to us by the state and is available on the state's Future Ready Index website. We looked at our internal local assessment data, including Acadian's data, IXL data, CDTs, our related academics in particular. And by related academics, I mean like family computer, consumer science, world language. They looked at their data sets as well and gave us some information around enrollment and what the demographics of students were that were actually taking part in those classes. And then we looked at our supplemental plans. We reviewed the plans that had previously been submitted, like last year's special education plan, our student services plan, our prior induction plan, and we came up with a number of different strengths, challenges, and areas that we'd like to focus on. But these are the ones that rose to the top. And really focused on what you see in bold on the right-hand side of the screen. The Pennsylvania Department of Education, as we were going through this process, they actually put out a lot of guidance in terms of how to go through the process. And they had this idea that high-performing local education agencies, LEAs or school districts or individual schools, share common characteristics, which we look for using the planning process. And the things on the right that are in bold are the things that we really focused on when we were looking at our data. And we're heavily interested in curriculum instruction and assessment alignment. Again, that's work that we're already doing here in the district. frequent monitoring of teaching and learning and focused professional development, supportive learning environments, and high levels of community and parent involvement. So you'll see from the priority statements that we really were focused on those things and that the data actually demonstrated that's where we should be focused. So after these series of meetings and all of the data analysis, we came up with 4 priorities, and each of these priorities actually has a goal attached to it. So the first priority is around the reorganization of our schools. And this is very interesting because the data demonstrated that our students were relatively strong coming out of our elementary schools. Their data and their growth and attainment, their growth attainment scores would dip when they went to Elkins Park just due to the transition. They would recover a little bit of that in 6th grade. They would transfer to Cedar Brook and have another dip. They would recover some of that in 8th grade, and then they go to the high school and they have another dip. So it's definitely like this wave. And the comprehensive plan steering committee, when they were looking at this data, actually named that as the #1 priority. Like the number of transitions and the fact that students are transitioning so often is problematic for purposes of the data. And students actually feeling sense of community and wanting and actually being able to perform as they are transitioning into these new environments and having an activity each time. So the priority was around the K-5, 6 to 8 reorganization of schools, which they are stating and hoping will reduce the number of transitions and then result in the ability of our structures at the K-4 level to expand into 5th grade, and then at the 7 and 8 levels, expand down into 6th grade. So that was something that really came out of that data analysis. So the goal is to reduce transitions between schools. We reconfigure our school model to include elementary schools that educate students in kindergarten through 5th grade, a middle school that's 6th through 8th grade, and then a high school that's 9th through 12th grade, with full implementation by the 27-28 school year. And again, this already goes also with the feasibility study and the planning that we had completed in the district prior to even this plan. So I think it was really interesting that the data demonstrated that the feasibility study was right on in terms of what the plan should be moving forward. The second priority was around attendance. Across all of our schools, we saw that our attendance scores were below the statewide average. No, the statewide target. In some schools, we were beating the average, but we still were not close to the targets. And particularly at the high school, we saw that attendance was definitely an issue and has been over time. So the priority is to reinforce the attendance practices to make sure that we're reducing data errors and ensuring accuracy, because we did have some discussion around how are we taking attendance. Are we taking attendance in a way that demonstrates the students are here throughout the school day, especially at the high school where we take period attendance? So if a student comes in late, how are we capturing which periods they actually attend? Are we doing this in ways that are sustainable for teachers? And how are we using all of our attendance practices to make sure that we're notifying parents of what's going on? So we wanted to focus on attendance because once students are in school, then we can actually focus on the engagement piece, making sure that they are engaged in instruction that makes them want to be in school. So the goal is we will examine, revise, and reinforce our attendance practices and procedures to reduce data errors and increase accuracy, and utilize the attendance supports that we have available to increase the percentage of students with regular attendance to 90% across the district by the end of this comprehensive plan cycle on June 30th, 2028. And that is actually an interesting goal because I believe the statewide target is like 94.1%. And the statewide targets expanses into 2033. So we'll still have 5 years after the end of this comprehensive plan to continue to work on attendance. But the hope is that we will actually bring our attendance up to that 90% rate. Priority 3 is really around increasing student engagement, and this ties specifically with priority number 4, which you'll see coming up. But this speaks about best practices in instruction in particular, and how we as a district are really focusing on creating engaging learning experiences for students that make them want to come to school. But also making sure that we are aligning those learning experiences to grade level standards so that we're not creating opportunity gaps for students. And this came from the data as well. We saw across our subgroups in particular that our students with disabilities, our Black students and our Latino students in particular were not performing at the same level as our white and Asian students across all grade levels and subjects. So we continue to have a persistent gap that, you know, I know is oftentimes referred to as an achievement gap, but I would like to reframe it in terms of that opportunity gap and making sure that we are instructing students on grade level and doing grade level work instead of doing what we think they can do, or giving them what we think they can do. We don't want to be in a situation where we're creating our own issues, particularly because the comprehensive plan requires you as a school district to assure that you are providing grade level instruction, and grade level instruction is dictated by standards, and standards are actually embedded in the law. It's not a question of whether they can or can't. It's a question that of us actually just having to do it. Once you provide grade level instruction to students, then you can determine whether or not they have achieved that mastery, and at that point determine whether or not interventions are necessary. And we want to make sure that we're in line with making sure that all of these different breakpoints exist, so that we're providing the grade level instruction first and foremost. So the goal is by June 30th, 2028, we would develop and implement data analysis protocols that are designed to inform instruction as part of our professional learning arc. And those protocols in particular will be used to monitor the academic achievement data of student subgroups in monthly data discussions that examine instructional strategies, engagement, and interventions. So really looking at the disaggregated data in ways that help us to drive instruction and also help us to examine what's going on in classrooms, and then change our instruction accordingly. And then last but not least is comprehensive planning priority 4. The priority was really around making sure that we have standards aligned curriculum from which teachers can teach for all of our core areas, which means math, ELA, and STEM, K-12. So you can see that our goal in particular is really redesigning our K-12 English, language arts, math, and STEM curriculum to ensure horizontal and vertical alignment. And by that, we mean that we're teaching to standards across all buildings, classrooms, and in a way that builds foundational skills and builds upon that for students from K-12. We also wanted to elevate the idea of varied assessments for students to demonstrate that they actually understand the standards and can demonstrate mastery of those standards. And here's the big part that you will see, and that will be coming before the board on a regular basis: the adoption of high quality instructional materials that we know are aligned and that are culturally responsive and have stories that are relevant for students, that are mimicking what we see on our state standardized high standards summative assessments, really looking at the materials that we are using over time and making sure that we reinvigorate them. The last time we did high quality materials adoption for math was in 2016, prior to the pandemic. It is time, particularly because we are now rolling out our contract for math. We're also needing to do science, which is now STEM, according to the new state standards in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the materials need to adjust because now the standards have adjusted. We have done some work on ELA over time, and we are continuing to do that work. We have been working with an organization called Resonance, and they have been supporting curriculum writing, and our teachers have been using the curriculum units to do some resource and materials alignment for our teachers at the K-6 level in ELA, math, and social studies in particular. So the work has already started, but it is a large undertaking for us to do over 3 years. So our next steps. we will be completing action plans that are aligned to these priorities and these goals, so that we can focus on evidence-based strategies. And by evidence-based, I mean actual evidence-based tier 1 strategies. We want to make sure we're using things that we know are effective, and things that we know are going to result in better outcomes for our students. The other state required reports that accompany the plan are going to be completed this week. They're actually complete now. So we will be doing our final read tomorrow so that we can be ready to post. And the plan will be posted for 28 days so that that feedback can be incorporated into the draft that we bring to the board for approval at the legislative meeting in March. That is what I have for comprehensive plan.
Fantastic. Any board questions or comments? Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's, we've always had both a comprehensive plan and a strategic plan. And I think the strategic plan has largely, at least from my perspective as a board member, been the driving force of how we frame initiatives at the board table. But these goals feel very, very useful for that as well. So I'm looking forward to having a comprehensive plan that actually augments our strategic plan and we incorporate into future goal setting processes. I had 2 questions. One is around what accountability should look like here with that light, because we're wrapping up a comprehensive plan. I'm not actually sure where we landed on whether we met our goals and things along those lines. And I'm forward looking, what is appropriate for report backs over time, both in terms of making it real and also in terms of not creating more burden in terms of reporting out.
I would assume that an annual report around the comprehensive plan would be appropriate, because the way the comprehensive plan is set up itself, the goals, when you go in and build them, they actually are set up by annual goals. So you have a year 1 goal, a year 2 goal, the year 3 goal is supposed to be tied to your measurable SMART goal, and that's what you're completing, but it's almost like you're benchmarking as you go. So the metrics are already built into the plan, and there is within the portal itself progress monitoring that you can do as a district that I think could be very feasible to bring back to the board through edit fairs on a regular basis once it's approved.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
My other question is, I don't think really, I don't know if it's an answerable question or if it's more of a food for thought for future, but in that first goal, that top priority goal around transitions, and you described this trend of sort of ups and downs, and this goal makes a lot of sense. It's essentially eliminate one of those transitions. The other side is improving the quality of those transitions. And I'm curious if we can, in these next 3 years, even if it's not a stated goal, if there are any low-hanging fruits to try to minimize the dips of the transitions that we are still going to have.
Yes, and it's so funny. It's like you were in the portal. I think the evidence-based strategies that you use to actually help achieve the goal as a district will become vital for that. I was talking with Principal Hammond and Dr. Scriven this morning around the 9th grade academy over at the high school, and using a model that is actually evidence-based to ease that transition for our 8th graders that are coming to the high school as 9th graders, and thinking more succinctly about, like, what do families need to know? What do students need to know? What do transition data need to know? How do we establish relationships so that the 9th graders come in and they already feel like they have an adult that they can go to? How do you set norms and expectations for what that culture looks like that they are stepping into? And I think if we can build a good model for that at the high school, it can be one that we can replicate into the middle school. And I don't think it's impossible. I think you do have to marry one with the other, and you can't just eliminate without thinking about how do you set the transitions up so that they're more feasible for children. Because you have to think, especially for our students that are transitioning out of 8th grade into 9th grade, just the size of the school over time has been so dramatically different. They're going from a much smaller school into a much larger school. evening the grade levels out, I think will facilitate and help some of that too, because Cedar Brook will become larger as well. And students will grow through that in a different way. So it won't be so much of a shock in terms of going from a school where you have 650 kids to one where you have 1,450.
That makes sense. And we're in our last year of our strategic plan, and it strikes me that some of what you just described might help inform that next set of strategic planning goals too. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Other questions and comments?
Just wanna fact check. The last comment, did you say when we are in our last year or that we are in our last year?
I said when we are, but you said that we are, but I meant when we are.
Oh, no, I'm just making sure.
Thank you for your homework.
We have one more year.
Just want to make sure I'm not trying to put anything else
I
on the
meant
table.
next year is when we start the conversation about the future. Thank you, though. It's the second time I've made that mistake. So
I
thanks.
just want
Dr.
clarity,
Smith.
so that's why I keep listening.
Well, I really thought that this was a robust process, and I really want to thank Tracy and Heather for structuring it the way they did, because the data itself demonstrated that the goals in the strategic plan were aligned to what's going to be the goals in the comprehensive plan. Like the data meets out that we were actually on the right path with the strategic plan. I just found it to be such a fascinating process because we dug through the data. We were in dirt with the data. It was a lot of data. But we were able to really think hard about like, what is the data showing us? Right down to, Principal Taylor and I were in a group one night, we were looking at the usage data around some of our online adaptive programs. And it was really revealing because we're not consistent in how we use things across the district in terms of assessments and in terms of materials. And it needs to be a little more consistent than it is.
Mr. Epps.
Appreciate the presentation as well, and also the collaborative approach. I saw the teachers and principals on the picture, but getting multiple perspectives. It was affirming to see, because I think from a facilities perspective, we've heard like some of our transitions might be a little rocky. From an academic perspective, we're seeing from a different lens and data, like what that transition looks like from a lived experience. And so I was really intrigued that we're kind of getting a more clarity around what this experience is, specifically like this 5 to 8 experience. And it just seemed very timely. Like imagine like you weren't, this isn't a feasibility study, but in some ways you're having some of the same conversations that we had as a result of the feasibility study. So in some ways it's very affirming that we're seeing some of the same things, because that means if we get it right, we can really make a difference. Around attendance, you mentioned part of it was a collection issue. I'm wondering, is chronic absenteeism something that we're experiencing in the district?
Not so much chronic, because chronic absenteeism is defined as a student that has 18 or more days of absence. And I think we see it in fits and spurts and in different places. Wyncote Elementary School in particular has particularly strong attendance, where we see very few students that are chronically absent from Wyncote. We see it more as the students matriculate up and have more autonomy over whether or not they're coming to school and how. Our attendance at the high school in particular is, I think, most concerning, because, and it's probably going to be less concerning this year than it has been in prior years. But a lot of that has been sitting down this year and trying to diagnose the underlying cause, like just even thinking about doing that root cause analysis. And we come to find out we were having a lot of issues with scholarship. And that definitely can be an issue, because if scholarship is not working the way that it should, it's not going to upload the data into PowerSchool the way that it should, because they're linked. So there's been some conversation around like, what does that look like? How do we put backstops in place so that we can actually make sure that attendance is taken when scholarship is down? How are we catching students up in terms of attendance if they come in late, for example? Our parents and families aware? I have been on top of that this year, and this past month, I'd say earlier this month, we actually started sending out like notifications of when your child is not in the school. Families are getting calls. I know it annoys some people, but for other families, it's very necessary. So just making sure that we are looping parents in the right way to provide that support, and also making sure that our internal systems are catching all of the possible errors and mistakes, and we're running the appropriate reports so that we understand when students are attending, when students aren't attending, how we're diagnosing with families and students why they're not attending if they're not coming, and making sure that we provide kids the support that they need.
I appreciate the legal definition, because that's where I was coming at it with as well, but it sounds like it's spotty, but it might not be chronic, but it's still enough there where it's
Yeah.
having an
Well, I mean,
impact.
when you think about it, 18 days
It
is
might
a
be,
lot,
yeah.
over the course of 10 months.
It doesn't take long to get there.
Yeah, because the state of Pennsylvania defines it as, the state of Pennsylvania wants students to attend 90% of days or more. If you have 180 days in a school year, 10% of that is 18 days that you miss. But that doesn't necessarily match what happens in terms of students that are chronically truant for purposes of court referrals, for example. Those numbers are different, and usually when you hit the 10-day mark, you get a referral to court. So that process requires us to notify families at the 3-day mark, at the 6-day mark, at the 10-day mark, but those all have to be unexcused absences. The 18 days that the state talks about are excused or unexcused.
Oh, I didn't realize that was.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So that 18 days could be
That's-
next, like.
Yeah,
Somebody goes on vacation for 5
Yeah.
days, that counts towards your 18 days, and that's an excused absence. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot that could go on.
appreciate that. On the third priority, a lot of what we've talked about, or a lot of what you, like your work around, part of it is like the actual instructional practice, part of it is mindset. And so to what extent is like the cultural proficiency? I know we just heard about having a teacher in every school, or proficient ambassador, things like that in every school. Like, to what extent is that captured in some of that priority 3 area?
Quite a bit, and the DEBI committee for the district, we've been talking about like how much of this is already operationalized in terms of mindset, and what additional work do we need to do at this point to help turn the corner. And some of the activities that we are thinking about focusing on, I even had a conversation with a group of students today around this, is like identity and intersectionality of identities, and really thinking about how the lens through which you see the world will inform what you do, sometimes unconsciously. So how are we actually going to have those conversations with teachers? A lot of it will be through the cultural, responsive teacher leaders that we have in the building now. But a lot of it will also be just embedded into regular learning experiences that we have for teachers over the course of the school year as part of our professional learning arc. And that's work that will never stop, because it will always need to occur.
Yeah. And then, certainly last but not least, in the 4th area, is there going to be some quantified measure around those high quality instructional materials? Or?
Absolutely. Okay. And at the legislative meeting this month, you approved a contract with School Kit, and School Kit is actually the consulting company that's going to support the district in developing this adoption process for high quality instructional materials. And the first step in that process is for their team to come and sit with our leadership team and really put together a vision for what we want, these materials to look like in the district. And they will also help us to build rubrics by which we measure and determine, which things we're going to choose and utilize. I'm quite sure there will be a portion of the process as well where we invite parents, teachers, administrators into this process to take a look at the materials as well. Because I think everyone should be able to touch, feel, see the materials before we actually spend $1 bajillion on it, right? And make sure that they are feasible for long-term use, and that they are high quality, and that they actually speak to our kids. So it's going to be very important that we have a process that A, is replicable, but B, speaks honestly to who we are as a community, what we expect in our instructional materials.
Mr. Redondo, please.
Just quick, you leaned into it a little bit at the end of your last comment around having folks touch and examine the materials, because I know I was just referencing and thinking through the goals that are outlined. They all kind of wrap back to the common characteristics. The one question that I had that I didn't necessarily see reflected there was the high levels of community and parent involvement. And so I was just curious if there was any ideas about how through the comprehensive plan, we were planning to do that. Because I see there, are opportunities to do it throughout, just not necessarily called out like the other four
Absolutely.
common characteristics.
And I think a lot of this is like just embedding and providing opportunities for families to become partners in some of this. Because I mean, obviously, there's going to be a lot of communication that has to occur and working with families through these transitions for, Elkins Park in particular. And when we talk about attendance, we've been looking at a different type of parent communication system. Thinking about how can we better communicate with parents and how can parents better communicate with us as well. There's attendance systems out there now where, through a portal, a parent can actually enter an absence note. They can type it into a field and send it off, and it hits our actual student information system, so that we're not dealing in little slips of paper. Oh, they lose the paper. All the children lose the paper. What is a way that we can actually bring this into the 21st century and create these mechanisms by which families can feel like they're in constant communication with us through the different technology that we use. So there's a part of it there around attendance. And then in these professional learning arcs, when we think about the data that we're going to look at to drive instruction, there's a piece here that's not named because it is named in the strategic plan, but it's around our multi-tiered systems of support and how we're bringing families into that piece, because obviously we're going to be looking at student data. So how often are we communicating with families about their children's data and what that looks like? And then, of course, we plan on bringing families in to the materials conversation. I hear from families here and there. I hear from our staff quite often. I have conversations with our librarians who would like definitely more money for books because they have some ideas about what we should be purchasing and what is relevant for students. We've had conversations with our music department around what kids like and the fact that, they come to school sometimes for some things that are outside of our core content area and what that looks like. I think there's a lot that we can do to have these conversations with parents ongoing, and it's our hope that they continue to, shoot us the emails and we have conversations when they see us. And honestly, I'm very excited about our students at the high school because I think now that they realize that Dr. Scriven and I listen, they will reach out and request an audience. And it's been phenomenal to be able to go sit with them and hear their ideas and hear their concerns too.
Got it. Yeah, I appreciate that context because I was thinking about it, reflecting on Dan's earlier comment about, the relationship or the crossover between this and the strategic plan and how we manage the communication and engagement around that, and thinking that we've got this 28-day period to essentially get folks engaged and excited about what is happening here. And that strikes me as very similar to how we presented the strategic plan as well. So
Absolutely.
thinking about that and as a beginning, maybe to all of this is also really good to see. This only comment I have. Thank you.
Other questions and comments? I've got one comment and one question. As a kid who only went to school for music when I was in high school, really glad to hear that you're thinking about the other reasons that kids come to school and reflecting that budget. Excited for those kids. The other thing that I'm thinking about is there's excellent alignment across the strategic plan with our priorities, with our comprehensive plan, with all the pieces that we're thinking about. I'm seeing it reflected in the agendas now for the legislative meetings as well. One of the areas that I'm thinking about that is a main responsibility of ours is budgeting. And so I heard some of the ways that we're thinking about budgeting as effort within these priorities, including school kit, creating high quality instructional materials. And this isn't something we necessarily need to answer today, but one of the things I'm thinking about are what are the ways in which these priorities are reflected in our budget moving forward. And so that's a question for Josh, I think, more than anything, but that's our job. Budget is effort. And so when we look at our budget, we want to be able to open that pretty clearly with these things, especially as we're. Okay, questions? Oh, Mr. Schultz.
Your comment about budget actually triggered the other thing we're responsible for, which is policy. And when we talk about high quality instructional materials. I've heard that phrase before and with capital letters and HQIM. And is that what we're referring to, the like HQIM, essentially high quality instructional materials? And should we be thinking about incorporating language to codify that in things like our curriculum policies and things along those lines?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have to take a look at the policy in particular to determine whether a revision is necessary. I didn't capitalize HQIM.
I didn't mean it that way.
No,
but yeah.
well, no, I mean, I didn't capitalize it because I think I did a lot of research around what that definition means, right? And I have not yet found one succinct definition that's used in multiple places. Everybody's defining it in their own way. And I think that's part of what this process with School Kit will actually help us, because that we will really, as a community, decide what we think high quality instructional materials are through the use of our rubrics. We'll define it first, obviously, because anything that we use, we need to make sure is aligned with the PA core standards. But then what else is included in this high quality piece? Structured literacy, I think, is going to be incredibly important, just because it's proven to support student learning in terms of learning how to read. I think cultural proficiency and culturally sustaining practices is going to be really important. I also am curious about, for our math curriculum in particular, like even though the PA core has its own kind of like math strands to it, it still adopted some of the Common Core they adopted the Common Core's best practices, and also adopted their three-legged stool in terms of making sure we have focus, rigor, and coherence, right? So there's going to be certain things that we look for in our materials that we now know are necessary to build student understanding over time and give them access to the content that they need so that they can demonstrate proficiency on these high-stakes tests.
So I guess all I would throw out is, as you're doing that learning, research, and putting things into practice, whether it's updating the AAR, or if there are things that would support you / also protect the district in future, right, over time, language that we should be considering, I think that would be useful for us to know about.
Absolutely. Thank you.
At this time, I will entertain questions and comments from the public. If you are sitting in the room here, please state where you are from in the district and then your comment, and same online. Anybody, any comments online?
I don't believe so. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
Clear assent.
Right. So I will bring the presentation back.
Unequivocal agreement with the plan. All right, thank you so much, and feel free to move into the next agenda item.
Absolutely. I would like to invite to the table Ms. Tami Flood and Mr. Girman. Come on over. We took it. Sit across. Look at that. It's a big table. A clicker for you.
Wherever you feel most collaborative, wherever you feel as part of the team. That's
It feels better. I feel rude though. I love
Get Tammy's ego green all the time.
You all need breaks.
Okay, so I know you all know me, but I'm Rachel Girman, data and secondary curriculum, and
I'm Tami Flood. I am actually a teacher on assignment, but I am a social studies teacher by certification since 1999, proudly here in the Cheltenham School District, and I'm excited to be here.
and Tammy and I are both deep AI nerds.
Yeah, definitely nerd.
I don't know what the word would be. But we wanted to talk to you today about what AI could look like in Cheltenham. We know that it's come up a couple of times in some of the board conversations. It's obviously budge in our office. So this is just sort of our overview. We're gonna go over the why that we believe it's really necessary for us to address, what it looks like in some of the surrounding districts, what we believe the path towards our future would be, a potential committee, and then the PD training time.
Could I jump in for 1 second? Sitting this close to the front of the table, I just don't want anyone to think that I'm an expert on artificial intelligence, but I'm certainly interested in it and happy to answer any questions. Okay, that was my disclaimer.
The glasses, though. make
Right,
it pretty close.
Yeah.
So we actually use AI to help us create the presentation, of course. And one of the things that we wanted to put forward with the why is just how incredibly important and timely it is, but also that our time is immediate. Because as any of you who are following what's happening with AI, you know how quickly it is changing and adapting. And our students are graduating in months into a world, if they're going right into the workforce in one version of the world, and in 4 years, potentially 5 years, in a very different version of the world. But either way, it is really much now. So our why: to prepare every student for a world shaped by rapid technological change, Cheltenham School District must integrate AI into our education. By equipping students and teachers with essential skills and fostering an inclusive, innovative environment, we must ensure every learner belongs, excels, and is ready to champion justice in a digital age. AI education is no longer optional. It's vital to achieving academic excellence and fulfilling our mission to inspire and empower our community for the future. So we worked really hard to try to integrate our vision and our mission into why AI is so necessary, and I know that that's clear to all of you. All right, so one of the things that Tami put together, and I'll have her showcase, is why school districts must include AI integration in the work that they're doing. Would you mind clicking on that? I don't know how to do that with this.
All right, so I can't take full credit for this, but everything AI, everything email I get, I always, sign up for it. So one of the workshops that I attended with other educators, this was a part of a larger conversation. So I'm going to be truthful about that. I'm not going to read this word for word, but if you kind of scroll as I kind of go through so you can get the essence of it, if you all want a copy, I'd be happy to share that. But basically, we have students, and we know as educators, people, community members, that our students are living in a rapidly changing world. It's as exciting as it is terrifying someday. And so we have a responsibility to make sure that our students graduate, go out into the world ready to embrace whatever comes their way. It's not like it was when I graduated, even 30 years ago. Don't tell me that. It is rapidly changing, and we want to make sure that these are the things, the consequences that we can avoid. So we don't want our students not being available for opportunities because they are at a deficit for something that maybe, in our heart, we want to protect them from this AI monster that we don't know much about. So it's a little scary. But the bottom line is they are going to face it. As a mother of a 16-year-old with social media, that's enough for me. Couple that with AI, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a serious thing. And we want to make sure that we kind of have our students on the ball so they do not suffer some of the consequences. So outdated teaching practices, we want to make sure our students are hands-on, that they're learning by doing. That's what we've been taught since, what I affectionately call teacher school. But the bottom line is, if we haven't been doing it yet, we need to make sure that we are doing it. Most people are doing it, but maybe it's time to level up and make sure that we can use the emerging technologies available to continue to do so. Underdeveloped AI literacy, which is probably the reason why I'm here. From the second that ChatGPT dropped, I kind of froze and said, oh my goodness, two things. I was like, wait, what does this mean for teachers? But number two, all I could do was flash back to whenever I first learned about social media. What if we had an opportunity to go back to the very first days of social media and talk to our students, talk to our children, and tell them how we should navigate things like social media? How would the world be different today? What if we all collectively as a society had done? I think we might be living in a slightly kinder, gentler world. So it is a responsibility. AI, in my opinion, is even more powerful than that. With things like deep fakes, where you can have a person look like me and sound like me and make it say different things. We need to make sure that our students are prepared and know how to navigate these technologies. So those are some of the consequences. There's a lot more, but Rachel, continue on with your presentation. Hour.
Okay. So some of the surrounding school districts that we talked to, we had the opportunity to be part of a group called PA Seed. That is a multi-county group that looks at STEM instruction and education. And part of a breakout of that was an AI group that wanted to discuss what it is that their work looked like in their district, what it looked like in other districts. And then also we had the opportunity to attend a training with John Spencer in the Bucks County IU, and also collaborated with some of the teachers in the districts there as well. So you have a multi-district, multi-county representation in this list. So we wanted to kind of walk through what that looks like in each district, what they've done so far, what they're working towards moving forward. I think just click the screen because the bottom popped up. There we go. Thank you. So with the Higgins School District, obviously not far from here, they had an AI cohort of about 25 teachers review some of the tools that are out there, the use of those tools, both for students and for teachers in and outside of the classroom. They didn't purchase any AI tools at the time earlier in the year that we discussed with them, though it was a conversation. And they decided at the moment to not write a policy or have an upcoming policy. They believe that AI is covered under their academic integrity and technology policy. And so what you'll see through this is kind of different ways each of the districts in our area are approaching this. And this also is potentially a couple of months old at this point of information. And so they may have shifted based on some of the other guidance that has come out since then. Norristown School District, their team actually was the one that wanted to spearhead the AI committee. They have done a lot of work. They have an AI work group with various stakeholders from admin and teachers. They don't have community members or students yet. They did decide to adopt the PSBA policy that came out earlier in the year as their policy. So we have links within the presentation that will take you to the policies that have been offered by some of the districts. So this is Norristown Area School District's policy and how they outlined it as well. We actually ended up using this language as well as a couple of other things to later in the presentation, we'll show you suggested or sort of like our initial draft of a potential policy that we would want to workshop. So we used some of this language to help us build those things. Then you have East Penn School District, which is our one of our neighbors in Bucks County. They also had an AI work group, again, various stakeholders from admins, teachers, and again, not students or community members yet, but that is something that we are going to advocate for. And then they too decided to adopt a modified version of the PSBA policy. And then Radnor School District, at least in terms of our relatively immediate area, is probably the most far along in terms of how they have looked at and examined AI and what they've been doing with it. They have created a very intense AI roadmap with a variety of stakeholders, including their board members, community, and students. They looked at AI usage levels. They have teachers taking courses on AI through their Schoology platform, and then they have been piloting various tools. They have teacher and admin teams. They have updated their handbooks. They have a position statement. They have board policies. They adjusted their honor code. They have a whole section on their website about AI. So if you would want to click where it says Radnor, yeah. So they keep adapting this, but their roadmap is on the right. Very simple, but awareness, adaptation, and integration, how they're working through that. And it's something they keep working on in a pretty large scale way. And by creating a position statement is kind of a stark contrast to what a lot of other districts have done at this point. And then they put it through acceptable use. They put it through an honor code, and it's become part of everything that they're doing instructionally with their students to make sure that their students are prepared to walk into everything that's coming to the best of their ability. And then they also use ChatGPT to help with that. So here are our two sort of next step suggestions, looking at things like policy guidelines and then putting out stakeholder surveys. So where we do want to include community and students as well as teachers and administrators in what we are looking at. There we go. So here are some of the potential policies from some of the areas. You have the PSA, the PSBA policy, MCIU, our local IU, put out a policy. The Department of Ed has an AI toolkit with suggested language. East Penn's policy is essentially the PSBA policy with some tweaks. And then you have Radner's honor code in here for you to look at. We put all of those pieces together and yeah, sorry. I can try to click. Put that together, and if you don't mind clicking on the AI use policy, put it into ChatGPT, ask it to put it together, gave it a framework, and went through and then did what Spencer calls keeping the human in the loop, not many other people as well, that you can choose to draft first and then tweak second. And so that's what we did with this. We went through, we took the suggestion, and then we adjusted based on our district, our context, our people, our kind of systems, to offer just a very initial piece that we would like to workshop with all of you and with any committee members if that's the direction you choose to go. But it goes through a lot of the things that we talked about: usage guidelines, privacy and security, transparency and disclosure, the delegation of responsibilities. It does talk about things like bullying as well and where that fits in, because there is sort of a two-pronged component to this. There's the educational piece, but then there's also the social piece. We want to try to do what we can to cover both of those things. We wanted to make sure that we talked about things like copyright compliance and plagiarism, also the bullying and harassment piece, but we also really want it to be something that students learn how to use, not just feel afraid of, and that our staff understands not just how to use it to help themselves in different ways to make their work easier or to sort of automate some of the pieces of their work or enhance some of the pieces of their work. We also want them to help students learn how to do the same, so that when they walk into the world where they're walking into jobs where there is an expectation that you know how to use these systems, that they know how to do that, that they don't just use it as a way to write a paper and put it in and call it that. So part of our proposal is putting out community surveys to students, to our families in our communities, and to our staff. We have a suggested survey. Our goal was to keep it pretty short. There's about 4 questions on it. Just trying to get a sense of where people are and how they feel about it, so that as we walk into potentially workshopping, as we're proposing the draft policy, that we have feedback from people around us to see where everybody is, as opposed to making assumptions about how they might feel or what they might believe. And also to be able to notice any places where there's some dissonance between perhaps different stakeholder groups and how we can build some consensus around those places. And then the second piece of what we're proposing is having a stakeholder committee, having groups of people from administration, teachers at different levels, because what AI looks like in elementary school is very different than middle school, because of the age restriction policy, but also adaptation in terms of grade level, age level. We would like them to review policy guidance, the stakeholder survey, finalize the district policy, and update our handbooks and our honor codes as necessary. And then really the biggest piece, and Tami's going to talk about that, is developing the educational focus areas, in part to enhance our post-graduate graduate planning for our students, because we think that this is a huge piece of the educational conversation and what learning is going to be integrated with in the future. There we go. I'm going to give you a thing that I can't figure out how to work. Yeah.
I was trying to move this so I can get to
know.
the slides.
All right, I'll try. Can I click just by, or do you have to do it? Yeah.
Or do you want to go through this before I?
Do you want to go through?
Sure, yeah. So basically we just summarized the components of what we were trying to look for in the, thank you, in the next steps. So having an AI work group, and then providing training for our stakeholder groups, having a 3-year cycle of professional development, and then during that time also reviewing various programs, and then having what the parent permission piece looks like with technology permissions, as well as part of the stakeholder feedback with those permissions.
Thank you.
I won't.
No, definitely.
We
There you go.
did it. We did it.
right, well, my question really kind of focused on the teachers, the classroom, and the professional development. And the professional development is essential because if our ultimate goal is to make sure that our students are empowered and can work with this emerging technology, then we have to make sure that our teachers first understand the technology and then are trained on things like how do you create an effective prompt so that you can get a quality output. So that's just what I'm going to talk about, and this will probably work. Hey, there we go. I got to put a quote in there because one time I heard you always have to put a quote in. So this is a quote. It isn't as great as I'm sure some of the quotes that we heard yesterday, but it is near and dear to my heart for a couple of reasons, because it talks about the fact, where the teacher lies in all of this, again, because they're boots on the ground. So at the core of teaching is interacting with the child to help them grow. A deeply human, demanding, and complex responsibility. They're irreplaceable. And I had to put that there because anytime we talk about AI, the conversation always comes up, well, this is just going to replace teachers. I promise you, we're not going anywhere. My daughter's thinking about education, going into education. I'm like, yeah, you'll be around for a little while. You cannot take the human out of education. It's so important. We learned the hard way back in, we won't say the year, but we learned the hard way. It's so important, that human connection. So, and Adil Khan is actually the CEO of Magic School. And that's kind of like a spoiler because I'm going to mention Magic School in a second. All right, so that was my quote to get us started. And let's see, maybe we'll just end there. Let's see. All right, so basically the importance of AI literacy. So that's what I'm talking about, literacy training for educators, the understanding of it. And I just kind of had to squeeze it all into 5 basic things. So first of all, enhancing teaching effectiveness. I know we have effective teachers, but we can always improve. We can always elevate and amplify instruction for our students. So AI can help tailor content, which is really important. And one of the challenges of any classroom teacher is when you have so many different students with so many different gifts and abilities, you need to teach all of them. You need to get them all to the standard. And AI can help do that with some of the programs we're going to look at here. So create accessible instruction and learning for all students. And the accessibility piece is really important as well. Secondly, to prepare students for the future, which we've already talked about, to better prepare students for a workforce influenced by AI and a tech-driven future. That is where we are. It is amazing to me. I'm going to throw my daughter under the bus again. When she went to apply for a job, I'm like, getting ready with the paper resume and all these other things. And they're like, sent her right online. Now, that is a change from when I started GAP Kids 150 years ago. But the bottom line is that is their new expectation. All right, promote ethical AI use. This is really, really huge for me. This kind of reminds me of that social media conversation I have. You can use anything for good and anything for bad. And we want to make sure that our students are putting all the good out in the world. But it starts here because who else is going to do it? That really is a responsibility of what we do. Besides the fact that this is new for all of us. And many parents are working their jobs and learning as they are going along as well. So they don't know maybe what they don't know. So if we have an opportunity to gather educators and make sure that they are on the front line of this, perhaps we can get ahead of it. Address and mitigate bias, which is a really big concern for everyone when it comes to AI, because it is a large language model with data pulled from everywhere in the world. And as wonderful as this world is, we don't all think the same way, and it's pulling data. So we have to be responsible. We have to make sure that we as educators are still emphasizing critical thinking and problem solving, not only for ourselves, but for our students, that they understand that. And in general, this was kind of a freebie, just amplifying learning, because there are ways that we can kind of take where we are, like I said, and level up. All right, so this is my favorite part, how AI literacy training will impact students. I'm hoping that it will equip them with lifelong essential skills. And who knows what's to come in 20 or 25 years, but we need to do our part for right now. Support students in understanding AI in real world application. It's not just something to answer a quick question and get the answer. There are real world applications that are so powerful that I think many of them are just missing out on.
enhance critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. To me, that's the most important part of all of this. And I feel like AI is the perfect kind of new, I was just reading something last night that said, don't call it a tool, it's a new species. It is, and it's kind of scary, but kind of exciting too. But basically that we can empower, and one day when we have more time, I'll tell you about the argument I had with ChatGPT because it tried to tell me that there was no bias in AI, and at the end I won. See, humans will win, I promise you. All right, learn about the ethical considerations, data, privacy, and bias, a very important one for both teachers and students and anyone who's on, and I'll give you this one for free. Never ever put your personal information into a chatbot, ChatGPT, Gemini. It becomes a part of the system and you don't want that. Okay, so that was free. All right, and lastly, help students reframe AI as a tool that enhances their knowledge, an assistant, a personal assistant, if you will, not just a way to cheat. All right, that's the bottom line.
If I can just add a piece
Please.
of that, when ChatGPT first came out, I was in the classroom, I was an English teacher, and one of the conversations that I had with students right out of the gate was, you can choose to let AI replace your brain. You can let it do the work for you, you can turn it in as your own, and you can gain nothing from it. Or you can use it to enhance your thinking, you can partner with it. And that is becoming more and more and more important in the world, not just in the workplace, but also in people's personal lives that they're learning how to use these. But to Tammy's point, there are also places that we have to help students be careful of how they might do that as well. But that the most important thing is that they learn how to work with it, not let it do it for them. And if we don't help them understand that, it does just become potentially an easy way to just replace their thinking. And then that ability for them to compete with peers out in the world post high school gets a lot harder.
And honestly, you see all the school districts that already have rolled this out. That's just a small, picture, multiply that across the globe. We want to make sure our students are competitive. All right, so I'm making some assumptions. If we are in the mindset that, yes, we're going to move forward and look at this AI issue here, if we have a work group in place, sort of like some of the districts that you mentioned, that we have training sessions that include central administrators as well as building leaders, because I think we're all kind of learning this all together. Of course, you guys are welcome to attend as well. Wrapper tools provided so that teachers can safely navigate and kind of get their feet wet. And what I mean by a wrapper tool is just a safe tool where they can get their feet wet, where they can manipulate or work with some of the AI to see what it can do, see what it can't do, see how they can kind of add their magic to it and make it something even better. So we kind of need a safe tool to kind of navigate that with, and we'll talk about that in a second.
And if I could just add a piece, the wrapper tool piece is essentially taking the chatbot piece out of it in some components that you don't necessarily have to initially learn how to prompt well, that the tools are created in a way to be sort of like a step one into the playground or into the sandbox. And then from there, people can build. And then they also have chatbots within it that could be used for students that are safe and that are connected with teachers, so that teachers can see what students are prompting for and things like that. So it's kind of like step one into it.
You're right. That's a really good point. Thank you for that. It's kind of like the baby bowl. You get your feet wet, your feet wet, it's safe. And one thing about the tool that we'll talk about, it has the guardrails. So it has the privacy covered. It would be compliant with all the privacy. And that would be a really, really big point. We need parental consent, assuming that we will share that with the parents and have consent, and teacher support from the Department of Innovation or Office of Education, which would be myself, Rachel, and a few other people who could support this in the early stages and beyond. We gotta skip something. All right, so training. Oh, there's one more, hold on. All right, move too fast. All right, so I don't know if this is the right title for this, but basically what ways could we make sure that we kind of implement the training? So in-service is always an opportunity, online or asynchronous training through kite learning, and obviously just on-the-job classroom training as well. So as far as the in-services, the dedicated number of hours over the course of 3 years or more, we just use 3 years, but it will probably have to be more because the technology is just going to continue to change. Basically various topics, and I have a list on a slide that you can see in a second. Teachers as trainers is one of my favorite things. So once we have that initial work group, some of those individuals will become the trainers, regardless of their discipline or in their discipline, whatever seems appropriate. I'm a big fan of the unconference or the ed camp style. I know it's like way dated and played at this point, but I've seen and experienced and planned one in this district at the high school. It was such an amazing, I'm not just saying it because I was part of it, but it was such an amazing experience because they truly picked their own learning. And when I tell you there was engagement, the engagement was off the charts because they felt like they owned it. So I would kind of recommend that as one of the ways we can do it as well. And I prefer the smaller groups. People are more willing to ask questions, to admit that they don't understand something, kind of in a large room sometimes. People can hide, and I think when it feels more intimate. So any way that we can bring the smaller groups together and then maybe meet as a large group would be the ideal way to share this information. Kite learning, self-paced, early dismissals, PLC, teams, any of those things. And finally, again, one of my favorite things to do is to push into the classroom, see the students, see the teachers, kind of walk beside them, hold their hand, answer their questions. It's just an effective way to kind of really touch hands with the people who we need to make sure that we're serving. All right, this is kind of overwhelming, but I'm going to make it as easy as possible. In theory, our plan would be to start with a small pilot. I just picked a random number, 30 to 50. I would think closer to 30 than 50. I will say that whenever we put out a pilot information that has to do with digital technology, we usually get a lot of responses from teachers, which I think is a really good sign. Do a nice introductory training, make sure everyone feels comfortable with the tool that we use with this, and kind of give them a process and let them go with it once they are trained. Obviously, we need to monitor, we need to constantly check in, provide continuous training. That can be online, that could be coming after school, that could be me popping over during a PLC time or team time, and then collecting some data, qualitative, quantitative, whatever it is, review the data with the team, with the teachers, the individuals involved, reflect and revise a training proposal for year 2, communicate with all stakeholders, and then summer opportunities, which I've been able to do the past 2 years, and it is the highlight of my entire year every single time because I get to work with the teachers uninterrupted, and again, smaller groups, and I find that it's so much collegiality there. It just makes me excited. Year 2, full secondary rollout, 6 through 12. With a wrapper tool, I'm sorry, I think I neglected to say that the wrapper tool, meaning the tool to kind of guide it, being Magic School could be one potentially, and we'll talk about that. There is a free version, there is a paid version, continuous training, and then we could start maybe, depending on how year 1 goes and what we reflect upon, maybe a small group of K to 5, a pilot for that. Repeat the same process as number 1, and then by year 3, try to move to a full overview with all teachers covered and introducing the AI literacy piece. That is slower than AI literacy with students. That is slower, that year 3, than I would like it to be. And if someone tells me to speed it up, I would love to do that. But I think, it is important, at least get through the first year to make sure that we understand everything before we open it up for students. But as soon as we can open it up for students, if we would want to do that in year 1, I would be excited to do that.
Not working?
Might need a little shake. Potentially a little shake. Just wanted to make sure I didn't skip. Just thinking about it. All right, so these are the wrapper tools that I identified. Magic School, which is a little bit of a spoiler. We can go ahead and click on Magic School. And as an educator, you would go in, click I'm an educator, sign off on being 18 or older, and we can sign in, Google sign in. I was hoping it would let me right
You're not one.
in. That's right, exactly. All right, that's their PR, the leading platform. Profile. It takes you through your role, which I think is really important. And you can see everyone is represented there, which shows that everybody is involved in this process.
I'm just picking
Everything,
everything.
everything. Give me everything.
We can see it all.
That's right, that's right. You want all? I do everything.
All of it. I know
All of it.
all of the things. Oh, not else like how to do that.
Pre-service teacher.
There's so many things here.
All good stuff.
I teach electives.
Just that, yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, I'm typing on the wrong one.
All the technology. Then it starts, and every single time you sign in, it will start off with best practices, which is great. And best practices, checking for bias. Make sure that you use, you can use it for your initial work, but it should be yours by the time you are printing it out or sending it to someone. That's so important. And that's why I said you cannot take the human out of it. And I want to make sure that both teachers and students understand that. Your judgment matters. You have to use your thinking cap, as they used to tell me. You have to make sure that when things are generated, you are using your critical thinking, your problem solving, all those wonderful skills, your reasoning skills that make you human, to make sure that you are interacting in an ethical way. And privacy is huge. It is super overwhelming for me to read, but it is very serious. Google's probably bought and sold all my information at this point. I'm gonna try to protect everything else. But protecting the privacy and in our institution, not only the teachers, but more importantly, or as important, I would say the student, their information. We have to make sure that people understand, well-intentioned people, if you are drafting a letter of recommendation for a student, which is perfectly fine to do, and you're going to tweak it, you cannot copy and paste that from that Google Doc, put it in just for spell check and have their first name, last name, address, phone number, and all their details, because that now becomes a part of the model. I don't think most people realize that. So that is something that is really important. So we acknowledge, and here we are, we're in Magic School. All right, so Magic School is actually a collection in the free version of approximately 60 or 70 small chatbots. I don't know how many of you are familiar with ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Perplexity. There's a whole bunch of what people are just calling AI out there, but what you're actually speaking of is generative AI, and they are chatbots. So basically, you feed information into the chatbot by prompting. From your prompt, you will get an output. What ChatGPT does is what Rachel described earlier. It doesn't take prompting out of it, because you still need a strong prompt, because as I said in the summer session, garbage in, garbage out. All right, you put good stuff in, you're going to get good stuff out. If you got a not so okay prompt, you're not going to get anything good out of it. But what it does is it kind of helps you out, and I'll show you in a couple ways. If I could just have you scroll up and down just a little bit, just so you all can slowly see some of the tools that are available here. Everything from a text rewriter, there's some lesson plan ideas. If you scroll down just a little, text leveler is my favorite. So many times teachers have asked me about the informational text. If you have a student, we talked about engagement for students. If you have a student that you know is really, really interested in frogs, right? And you want to make sure that this student is engaged. You have to teach your concept, but you want to put it in the context of a frog. You can go in and actually generate that with the standards, with everything else, just to make sure that they are using the skill. But now you're also pulling on that interest. The standard unpacker, depth of knowledge, questions, video summary, project-based learning. I could go on and on and on. This is just a phenomenal tool. If you have never been inside of Magic School AI, I would encourage you to look just to see what all is possible. One of the things I always love, and I'm corny for it, but I like those little team builders. I like to kind of like on a Monday or Friday, they hate it, but that's okay. I'm fine with that. I want them to bring them together and just something sometimes on a Friday, you can't think of that one thing. You know, you were all tired, but you want to give them a little boost. That you can put in an idea. Maybe something happened on the news. You put in an idea, you put in the grade level, generate a quick thing. Little things matter. We talk about the classroom newsletter. These are things that help even to streamline the workload. They are so important. But at the end of the day, our most important job is preparing these wonderful lessons for our students, these engaging lessons. So yes, we want to do effective class hours. They are super time consuming. So if you can use this and put your ideas in just to streamline your workflow, then we can focus more on teaching. That's what we should be doing.
Just as an addition to, there are not only academic pieces to it, but there's also behavioral components. So for those of you who I know are very passionate about the SEL piece, MTSS and interventions, one of the things that we're finding as we're working through the MTSS process is trying to generate enough ideas about how to intervene with students, especially around things like attendance and behavior. There are programmatic pieces that we have. There are external support systems that we have. But one of the things we want to also try to do is what can we do in the schools with students? And there are lots of places where that sort of work exists in here, both through SEL lessons, so a tier 1 sort of piece of what happens in the classroom, as well as behavior intervention generations that can give us some ideas that we may not already have.
And Ms. Savage is reading my mind. I want to go into one of these tools. So it looks like you want to check out some SEL.
Sure.
Let's check it out.
I just was pointing.
All right, so we want to create an SEL lesson plan. So we can go in, you can see this is set up K through 12 and professional development and everything else. So second grade level, couple different things. They kind of give you, if you don't have any ideas, you're not sure how to use it, you can actually go up to exemplar. The exemplar, they would kind of fill it in, and that way you could generate and see how it works. And then you, as the instructor, can go in and put your own things in. But here we go, how to make friends. With prompt. I'm going to tell you how to improve that prompt. The standards too. Let's do it. Let's do it. That's Katie in the back.
Which standards? The
Castle. Dr. Writing, do we approve?
Let's go.
And optional if you want any additional criteria, but we can go ahead and generate. All right. So within seconds, we are really, really smart at this table, but this did it really, really fast. Now we can use our brains to come together and decide, well, what's appropriate for our students? I like this piece. I don't like that piece. I have time for this. I don't have time for that. I like this, but for Billy, I'm going to do something else. So the bottom line is that they can help us generate ideas, which is what I love it most for, which I love most generative AI for, just for ideas. There is a such time in the school year. It's usually around, let's say, late February. It's very dark. The sun hasn't been out for a while. You love what you do, but it's really hard to come up with fresh ideas and put a smile on a 16-year-old's face when you're doing absolutism. So you need some fresh ideas, and if Magic School can give you that little burst of energy to go through with it. I love that we put in standards. I love that it has a clear objective. Some key points outlined. And again, to me, this is just a starting point. I think for any teacher, they would go in, they would polish it, they would generate a couple different versions, and eventually maybe even shoot it over to a Google Doc and still make some additional tweaks before finally executing that lesson. But that is just the power of this tool. and there's over 80 of them for the paid version. I want to show just one more thing, just to show off before we go. And this is the teacher side. There is a paid side where we could onboard our students with AI literacy, with the teacher in control. So I'm just gonna ask Ms. Savage if she could go to launch students, which is the purple rocket. There's a video, if we had time, we'll watch it on our free time later on. But we're going to, where's the X is probably behind.
It's underneath the video.
Oh, I think it is. I just left,
Oh,
which is fine, perfect. We actually need that launch number.
okay.
All right, so we want, let's say that we have decided this is the tool we want to go with, and we have the ability to use it with students. Now, there's 80 tools there, but we basically want students to complete whatever the assignment is that we have with 3 tools. We want them to make a podcast because we know you can't just check GPT podcast, but you can use it to generate ideas. So what we're going to do is select launch new room. And I hope it lets us go all the way through because we don't have the subscription yet. There's your student room, there's your grade level, and your students with 26.
Let's really hope that, you know, the second.
I know, I'm like, what is that?
You're like, here, Savage, do the thing.
Yeah, don't you teach all of them?
I teach all of the children, right?
You did click everything to be.
I know, that's why I assumed.
So how about I do 30?
And then minutes. All right, so your room tools will appear here. So we're gonna go down, you know, can you just type in for me in the search tools, let's put podcast. All right, that come up? So we're gonna add that. Let's put, should we put
Image generator.
image generator? Look at you. She's already on it.
I'm gonna click right here. This is writing.
Sure.
And you type, yeah.
There you go.
You do 7 starters.
Or writing.
I was gonna do text proofread.
You may
Do it.
To
everything.
text proofread my script
I
on
own
my
it.
podcast.
Makes sense to me.
You got it.
There you go.
All right, so those are the 3 tools I want my students to have access to. So I have control over all the tools, but my students, I'm gonna assign this, and these are the tools that they may use. So this is powerful for a couple different reasons. Number one, we're showing we trust them. We've talked about this. We know you guys are responsible users, and I'm gonna allow you to use this because I know you can handle it. Initially, I think the students, you know, before the novelty wears off, they will like that kind of trust because it's like, oh, we don't have to cheat. We can actually get help for this. And I think the power becomes when they see that they are generating, creating their own work. And this is really just an assistant. This is just a way to proofread. Oh, I don't have to hand in work with misspellings or ask, does spelling count? Which people still say, yeah, spelling always kind of counts. So now they can do that. So there you go. We're going to empower them with these tools. We can launch the room. And it's so easy to do. Our students are very familiar with working with these digital tools. We can send it out through Google Classroom with most of our students K through 8 use. The rest of our students could join if you're at the high school with the link on Canvas. And they use this with other tools that we have. They would copy that. The teacher would send that to our Canvas classroom if it's at the high school. They would enter there, and then this is the part we can't replicate right now, but all the student names would come up. The students would continue their assignment, do whatever it is they need to do. If another teacher and I actually tested it, as they are working, we can watch kind of how they're using the tool, and that's the powerful piece. When our students right now are using ChatGPT on their phone, they're engaging hopefully very responsibly, but if not, there's no one that can say, hey, no, that's not the way we use this. This will alert an adult, you know, about what's going on. So if it is an opportunity, if a kid is stuck, if a kid is kind of off track, to just say, oh, but no, it looks like you have a question. It looks like you have a question here from what I'm looking at. Oh, yeah, I'm back on track again. And again, this isn't really a gotcha, but the whole thing is to kind of train the student so they understand how to interact with the technology. So I think it's a really, really powerful tool. There are lots of tools. This is the one I keep coming back to. As soon as I hear about a new tool, I go, oh no, and then I go looking back over it, this one over here. So, and it just keeps getting better and better. So that is Magic School. I think I may have a conclusion somewhere or something close to a conclusion. All right, so considerations for pilot groups, because we didn't talk about that. And this is something, again, we threw ideas out there and a lot of information. When we think about timelines, is 3 years realistic? Do we need to get students piloting sooner? Do we want to wait to year 2 or 3 to do that? Or do we want to do it now because we all seem like the time is now? Wrapper tools, there's so many tools out there. Do we want to use Magic School? Do you want to use the paid version of it so that students can have access to it and teachers are in control and can monitor it? Parent permissions, I don't think that many people would disagree with it, but I don't want to assume. What happens if parents don't agree to it? How do we handle that? So there are a lot of considerations. What do the community members need to know about it? And because some people may hear AI and think, I think we may all know those old enough to get Sarah Connor. Does everybody know the Sarah Connor? Of course, Terminator. Some people may be really afraid of the technology. Like, I don't want my kid doing that stuff. And so is there a conversation that needs to be had with the larger community? And for 3 years and beyond, what does continuous training for teachers and students look like? Because this is just the beginning. And I think if we have the same conversation next year and put up this presentation, we'll be like, that's all old. We can't do that anymore. So just to make sure that we're continuously looking at the plan, revising, reflecting, and all that good stuff. And I think the next slide says questions. No, it doesn't. One more. All right, so basically, I'm not gonna read all these to you, but what would some of the training topics be? The common sense ones, the basics, AI in education, the why, the perils and promise, which I took that from a book that I'm actually reading right now. It's really interesting because we have to address ethics, bias, safety, privacy, prompting for success. When people are ready to go into the deep end and they want to create their own prompts and do what Rachel does a lot when she's looking at data, the fancy stuff. What can we do to help teachers kind of reach that level eventually, and students, obviously. Literacy for students, importance of AI, digital and media literacy. That is one of my big things. We all have to do better. If I see another Facebook post that's clearly satirical that people are upset about, we have to make sure that we are graduating students who are prepared for this world and can be successful. That's it. We're all done. No, any questions, comments? I promise we'll do our best. And Rachel wants to go first. I'm just kidding.
Depends on the
Go
question.
ahead, Ms. Emma.
I have about 20 questions.
Let's go.
3 of them. Some of them are just thoughts.
Okay.
One is Dr. Scriven. I wish the gentleman that was at our meeting, our last legislative meeting was here, because that was one of his questions was about AI and how we're using it and are we preparing our students for it. So I'm glad that this work is being done at this particular time. You talked about some of the things, so I had a question around privacy that you actually answered.
Okay.
And then, but the second part of that was for privacy considerations, and I heard you talk about student data, which is a really important one. What are some additional privacy considerations that are being given to any tool that's selected? So student data is one aspect, right? And some of these questions are generated because we're doing this work in my organization too.
Perfect.
Thinking about these things.
So can I respond to that one?
Yep.
Okay, so there are kind of two pretty classic ways to protect is around CIPA and COPPA compliance. And so all of the wrapper tools that we would look at would have to meet those compliance standards that are about protecting students and children. And so that would be there. That's kind of a no question bar for us at the bottom. They would all have to meet that compliance on both of those thresholds.
And is some of those privacy considerations also around and this is the question that we're looking at, it's very interesting, the responses or the way the technology is written, because as you said, once it's in there, it's in there. But are there considerations given, and does Magic, for, what's it, Magic School?
Magic School, yeah.
Magic School, do they have a policy around destroying data? So,
I have actually read that, and yes, they don't store any data. They
okay,
don't store any data. And obviously, before we move forward with anything, our technology director will go through it with a fine, but he has seen it. But he would go through it with a fine tooth comb, but it is certified, and that is one question that I looked at even before I sent it to him. Yes, it is destroyed. When it is destroyed is what I don't remember. Is it the end of the school year? Is it the end of the day?
how long is it maintained? Things
Exactly,
like
because
that,
that's legitimate question.
Yeah.
And I think part of having a district committee around this is to vet and to look at the tools and think about those kinds of questions as well.
I'm just gonna do 3 questions. Because I have 10, so the second question is around policy, because of course my brain went right to policy, which is something that if this is going to be used in the district, we need to really start thinking very quickly about what an AI policy and accompanying ARs would look like. One of the ways that I'm thinking about it is because there are so many different tools out there, and without having a policy and those ARs guidelines in place, everybody could be using different tools, right? And so what are I'm not expecting an answer to this now, because this is probably a more comprehensive conversation around what guidelines should the board be considering in terms of putting a policy around the tools that get used and approved, like the approval process for using tools. And
So I think part of that goes to what Ms. Savage was talking about before in terms of trying to create some consistency across buildings and across the district for the programs that are being used. So that would be part of it. Part of it is we included the PSBA, the MCIU, the Department of Ed sort of recommendations, as well as a draft policy, because of exactly what you said, that what might this look like? One of the things that you see time and time again is a suggestion to make sure that the policy is platform or program neutral, so that you don't accidentally wrap yourself into a place where your policy becomes invalid because you've made it specifically about Magic School.
Right.
And then
yeah, it shouldn't be that, it should be broader, it should be much broader than that.
And for a little bit, there was a period of time where a lot of the lawyers in the area were talking about that our current policies would protect around things like bullying or plagiarism. There are still people who definitely subscribe to that, and so you could go that route and say that's enough. But most districts are no longer doing that, and I don't want to say most. Many districts are no longer doing that, and they're starting to create something a little bit more concrete, if for nothing other than to be explicit, as opposed to kind of waiting until there's something to talk about. So our recommendation was to have something explicit, but again, program neutral, platform neutral, that addresses a couple of the different components and prongs that people are worrying about beyond what happens in the classroom around education and plagiarism, but also things like bullying and harassment. And some of the SIP and COPPA compliance pieces, the expectation of program review and evaluation, that sort of thing. Because especially when it comes to privacy and student data, there are places where teachers can find programs and educational resources that are great, but they don't use any student data and students put nothing into them. Something like this becomes very dangerous for people to use off the cuff and not have approved. And so that has to be kind of part of that process, that there really shouldn't be that, that kind of use happening.
From an equity perspective, because you talked about the paid version and the non-paid version, and typically what we find is the non-paid version is usually a scale down where you don't get access to all the bells and whistles.
Exactly.
And so from an equity perspective, and then you have parents that can go in and say, well, I'm going to pay for it for my kid.
Right.
I would be interested in knowing what the cost would be per student for a paid version to see if that's something that the district could absorb.
Yes. And I believe we do have a quote. It's a folder quote, but we do have a quote that I could make sure Ms. Savage has. Or we can get a new quote if I just talk to Brian, we can get that.
And just one comment, and I'm sure my other fellow board members have questions, so they'll probably ask 2 of the other questions after, or just a comment. And from a change management perspective, when you talked about educating teachers and some community, I would really like to see a comprehensive change management communication protocol around not only educating the staff, but also ongoing education for students, their parents, and community stakeholders. And that goes a long way into having a transparent dialogue around what it is. There's a lot of fear around AI. And you have some people like myself that, it's like, woo-hoo, it's here, and I don't have to think as, my brain doesn't have to hurt as much. I can get something, and there are other people that's like, this is of the devil, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I think that would go a long way into having just that ongoing community. And even one of the things that you mentioned around, like with social media, schools didn't get in front of that. We relied on parents. Right? And frankly, parents didn't do a good job of policing and monitoring. We were relying on the companies who were just trying to make money off of that to do it. Right? Here, I think this is something that we can get in front of and start educating our students around the good, the bad, and the ugly. Around, what happens when you do this, so that we're not creating a system where it's use it good and you get rewarded, and use it bad, you get punished. And they don't really understand, what those implications are.
Other questions and comments? Mr. Schultz?
I was waiting, I was gonna go last. Maybe I still am. Thank you very much for the presentation, and I'm very glad we're having these conversations now. We've, I think, been bubbling around the need for AI policy for months, at least since the PSBA conference, and I think before that as well. So thanks for kicking that off. I have a lot of thoughts, and I will not share them all right now. I hope I can hop on that committee.
Yeah, no question.
And my background's in technology. I'm a maker. I build things with AI, and I've worked with organizations that are trying to build systems that are powered by AI, and we think through things like, what are ethical applications of this? What are the actual things it can do well, and what are the things that it can't do as well, but people think it does well, and then that gets them in a trap where they're making biased decisions or incorrect choices.
I was the first person that taught me how to use ChatGPT.
We used it to help brainstorm the mission and vision statement. I mean, and we did not copy and paste from it, but to your point, it is a great tool for brainstorming and generating ideas that help you reflect. Exactly, it's a great thought partner. That said, we talk a lot about authentic educational experiences, and to some extent, artificial is the antithesis of authentic. And so I want to make sure that as we're approaching these tools, especially from the professional standpoint, I don't know if I feel like policy is not the right spot for that. Maybe administrative regulation is, but more likely it's all on you to run with this kind of concept. But how do you create the guidelines that ensure things stay authentic? And just as an example, a student, I have a kid in the school district that got back a report. I could tell a lot of it was written through GPT. That really devalued that interaction I had with the school district. And that's where we wanted to be careful. The other thing is Rick Topper's message to the board. If you haven't read it already, please do. He was the English department head at Cheltenham School District for a while.
He was here for 22 years.
Yeah,
Retired in 2018.
It was as well written as you would expect a statement from Rick Topper to be. But it talked a little bit about not just the hard skills that our students need to learn to be effective as they graduate, but also kind of what does AI mean in terms of our existence as human beings, and how does it tie into our society and our culture. And so as we're exploring these tools, I think we're going to also want to have a parallel. What kinds of courses do we need to help people reflect on what does AI mean? What does it mean about being human? What does it mean? What does it mean that this created this and that I'm incorporating this, and how? I also think that it's funny that we were talking about high quality instructional materials, and then we're also talking about AI generated lesson plans, right? And those also kind of go against one another, I think, or could. Yes, I don't mean it does always, but the lesson plan generated by an AI has not been vetted through whatever high HQIM framework we're going to put together. So I'm looking forward to seeing how these things play out. I'm gonna be the voice that rah-rahs putting literacy at the forefront, because that feels very concrete. And also arguably maybe the most important thing for us to do with AI right now to serve our students, helping them interpret and critically challenge all information they see. Because here's the thing, AI generated content is a new form of potential misinformation or potential whatever. Photoshop has been too. Deepfakes,
That's right.
you know, this was 5 years ago when deepfakes first came out. I was a panelist on a thing. I got a question around, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do around fighting deepfakes? And my answer was, we've been needing to fight this stuff for a decade, for quite a while. So it's a lot of those trends aren't going to be new, and that brings me to my last. And I know this is a lot of monologuing, not questioning, but my last thought is we don't need to reinvent wheels when it comes to things like literacy around this space. Also, it's moving a mile a minute, so the more we can tap into resources rather than trying to develop our own, I think that will be worth a lot. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. And
Wasn't AI generated? If I can just respond to a couple of things.
Sure.
So I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is that the AI conversation is going to force a conversation around education in general. And so again, as a high school English teacher 12 seconds ago, one of the things that I pushed with my department when ChatGPT first came out, and I remember I can still see my colleagues looking at me, I hate you for saying that. But one of the things that we talked about is Microsoft, one of the first things that they launched with the kind of advertising around Copilot was, we're going to be able to make presentations for you. And then we're going to be able to generate scripts for you. And we're going to be able to generate images. And so the question that I posed to my colleagues that was not about answering was, okay, so then at what point does it become plagiarism or co-creation and I said, there isn't an answer to that, but that's the conversation. That's right. Is what are the skills? And this is where kind of coming back to your conversation around ethics is, we have to have conversations around what are the skills that we want for our students. It's the portrait of a graduate conversation that are hard and fast, the things that we need you to do. Is it about creating a presentation? Is that the skill that we're asking for? Or is it consideration of your audience? Is it about generating an image? Or is it about considering what image is going to be the most powerful? And so thinking about those sorts of things when we make decisions around what we're doing with AI, what we're not doing with AI, what we're having AI start for us and then us tweak, all of those things are going to be really messy. I think the very quick and easy thing is like, we love the tools conversation in education because it feels like it's going to make something easy. But there are massive undercurrents of conversation around something like AI that we have to have as part of this work, both in the committees, in the professional development, with teachers and students and community members around what this looks like, because we've known for a long time that education is changing and that pieces of this have not been working. And this is forcing a conversation in a lot of places that people don't want to have. But it's happening whether we like it or not. So what is it that we want it to be? And so I think I appreciate your points around the places that people are afraid, the ethics that have involved it, what does it mean for us as human beings? But then also the kind of like pushback. There are a lot of really wonderful things that can come out of AI and making intentional choices about when you use it and when you don't. Like the thank you note one in Magic School makes me laugh. Like, I want to write a thank you note personally. If I don't want to write a thank you note personally, I'm going to put it into AI. That may mean something about our relationship. Right? But like, there's an intentional decision making. There's intentional decision making. So those are part of the conversations with students too about when we use it in part and whole and totality or not at all. And that, you know, again, the John Spencer conversation earlier this year that I went to, he loves to write. And so for him, that's not a place that he wants it to touch. He will generate ideas with it and he wants to write himself. But he talked about that it becomes about making a choice for yourself about where this makes sense for you. And as teachers, you will get to decide some of that and then hopefully create space for students to decide some of that as well.
Ms. Henry.
So piggybacking on Dan, because I did have this down here. which, one thing is that there are, AI technologies that can detect the percentage of AI that was, I've used them and
Yeah.
they're pretty accurate. I don't care whether it's 90 or 80, but I know that I've got a paragraph out of AI and it was able to pull out and say, this was mostly generated by AI. As opposed to writing something myself and saying this was basically generated by a human. All right, does Magic School use that or will that, be utilized in?
I would say probably no. Much, and Dan, I don't know if you can back me up on it. A lot of the research is saying that the AI plagiarism detectors are not very reliable. Because it is using that same, in many cases, it's using data from GPT, it's using the same data.
Thing too.
I actually tested it with, I used to send home a parent letter every single year, welcoming their students. So I used a letter from like 2002 in my files, put it in. One said 100% authentic. I was like, of course it is. I put it in the other one, it was like 80%. I was like, whoa. So I think we have to be cautious. And a lot of teachers do say like, oh, I need something because I know this. And I'm just like, well, if you know it, then you know it. You know it like you knew it 10 years ago because you have a relationship with the student and you know where they are. So it's a conversation. I wouldn't say ChatGPT or this tool said that because what if that didn't happen? What if it wasn't a native English speaker? Because that has been one of the flags that one of the
That's the bias.
yeah, it has a huge bias for that. There's a lot of different, so you got to be careful about it because especially with teaching, the relationship is huge, and once you violate that, and did we all see the case in Massachusetts? Do you remember? You sent it to me.
Yeah.
Rachel tell you.
Well, it essentially comes around the accusation of plagiarism and the ways that understandably parents or students can get really upset. So I actually have an anecdote that I've told before. Some of you may have heard it, but again, ChatGPT came out the year that I finished teaching in the classroom. And I had a student who submitted a paper. We had Canvas and we had a tool that was added to it to kind of flag. And it came back as 100% AI. And this kid was sheet white, was so upset. His mother emailed, and I am kind and chill. I'm not, the like militant about it. And I just said, hey, this is how this came flagged. Can we come have a conversation? I always assume best intention. So he painstakingly showed me all of these drafts. He'd been working with a writing tutor, and there was, I think, 8 different drafts with like 20, 30, 40 comments from the writing teacher and him going back and forth. And again, I went to my colleagues and I was like, hey, we have a problem.
Right.
Because this thing that we think is going to flag it can't do it.
Right.
Because what it's actually detecting is good writing.
Right. Real.
Yeah, right. So it's like, oh, well, it's probably AI because you're 15 and so you can't possibly write that well, or write in a certain style. And that's the other thing, that as you teach formulaic writing style to students and the AI is also using the formulaic writing style, so that becomes the messiness of it, unfortunately. So it's one of those things that really, it can tell you yes, but it can also falsely tell you yes.
Right.
And so.
Another caution that college students have been flagged and some high school students with Grammarly. Grammarly uses AI.
Yes.
And a lot of it, I use Grammarly, and I'm just like, although I don't think Grammarly is always right, but that's another story. No, that's
Right.
So that's
When I did, it's not right, because they do stuff and I'm like, that's not how I learned. It doesn't make any sense. But the only other comment that I wanted to make is, I was in an executive program, and when we started out, they were like, you cannot use AI. A month in, they were like, okay, you can use it, but you have to source it. You have to cite it. And so that's what people started doing.
That's been the biggest advocacy that we've been saying.
the biggest analogy, the one that always sticks with me. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube.
Once
It's
it's
out.
out.
So now let's live with it. Let's embrace it. Let's figure out how we can navigate it and win.
Other comments and questions?
It's just, it follows with that, and I think it's in on Radner's site, it's somewhere in there is, and I've seen it in other places, is that kind of, I don't know what you'll call, the list of, for an assignment where the teacher would say, this particular assignment is 0
Right.
GPT.
Right.
This one is, you can use it for ideas. And so it just makes it like, if, once you like are bringing students on board that, yeah, this can be so helpful, it can be a tool that we use, here's the different ways we can use it. And as they get to use, learn how to use it better, and then they have that freedom that, so, all right, that, I mean, again, it's gonna come down to the relationship, yeah, this is what I was talking
Yep.
about.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of colleges are starting to use something like this, and I think, I'm sure someday, or maybe not that far in the future, we'll have our own iteration.
Right.
Something like this, and some teachers may already,
And I appreciate the point that you made about the freedom piece, because the goal eventually is to have students self-select what makes the most sense for them, for their style, for their learning, that sort of thing. And so as much as I can understand this as a beginning point, the hope is to be able to take that away. And so that students can start to self-select responsibly, ideally, when it works for them and when it doesn't.
and just a thank you, because I know that this has not been like a few weeks you've been working on that. Many months and not years, so. Yeah, like going to all of those, conferences, workshops, reading and putting together like a lot of comprehensive, so I appreciate that, thank you.
Ms. Murphy.
I appreciate the time I know it took and how you likely feel like you're behind the 8 ball every other day with this. Because as a non-digital native, I've been using AI for a few years now. And so it's not like there are folks that everybody's not afraid of it. Right? And so having knowing what I know in the limited way that I use it, I've used Magic School for a school year, and knowing how much deeper it can go and knowing how quickly it can change, I just want to say thank you for even doing this work, because of the speed that you have to keep up with to make sure that what you're presenting, what you're finding, what you're teaching is going to make sense tomorrow.
I just read Dr. Riley purchased some books for us that we were like, can we get these books? So he put it on a desk Friday and said, can you read this by Monday? I was like, yeah, sure. But I got like 10 pages in and it was talking about agentic AI. And I was like, oh, good, something else. I was like, that won't make the presentation because I don't even know what that is. But you're right, that's what it is. It's like, oh, good. As soon as you feel like you have a grasp, it's like, oh yeah, we're not doing that anymore. Now we're here. It's like, oh, good.
Yeah, for any, sure you pay attention to it because of your life, but, the agentic AI launched. Like,
Yeah, and I was like,
3 days ago.
Yeah.
And so the automation and the systems that are so when we talk about speed, it's really fast. And that's by the time our students graduate in a year and they're in a workplace potentially, or they're in college, there are already companies that are using kind of versions of that in their systems. And so, sorry, I know I can see them stressing too.
I know.
But so, yeah, that's the imperative. And also the necessity of going back to the policy conversation and making sure that there's flexibility in the way that it's written. That it doesn't necessitate a constant rewrite in
Well, it's not
response to that.
It can't be restrictive.
Yeah.
But it does have to provide the guidance, so that our students are safe.
Questions and comments?
One last comment,
Sure.
at least one from me. Very encouraged again. I know we shared this a couple of times about where we are with the conversation. Yeah, just seeing how there are, the best educational outcomes as a focus. Like, we do want to be in the forefront of that as best we can. I know it might feel like we're behind, or it might feel like things are moving unbelievably fast, but I'm encouraged by the level of information that went into the level of information that was presented tonight. And I think I've extracted from it, even having invested time in learning the PSBA policy, et cetera. But it's important and imperative that we have a conversation right now. And I like that we started the conversation here because it gives us one forum and as a precursor for some policy conversations potentially without, dominating I think a policy meeting with all of this information, because in my broadest opinion as one board member, it could be one topic of one entire policy committee meeting. So I appreciate the fact that we're discussing it now. That gives me as one board member and the community and everyone an opportunity to kind of digest what we have going on. And again, appreciate the format and appreciate the work that went into it.
You're here.
All right, I've got one comment. I also use AI daily in my daily work as an educator. And so I came prepared. I asked ChatGPT to act as a highly inquisitive, equity-focused school board and to ask questions that might pertain to a strategic implementation and use of AI and training in schools. And so I'm very happy to say that I brought those questions with me to ask, and they were all either answered in this presentation or asked by board members.
Go first.
Excellent.
We're smart.
Just say it.
Absorb it for a little bit.
One of the suggestions when using AI tools is to ask AI about AI, because it'll tell you interesting things about the ways the developers injected their thoughts into the use of it. And those were the things that I really saw reflected in this conversation is the equitable and ethical use of AI, the use of removing barriers to access for kids who might have learning differences and disabilities. And so it's very clear, Ms. Flood and Ms. Girman, that your work here is right on, and I'm very excited as one board member to see where this work goes over the next couple of years. At this time, I'll ask for public comments.
No problem.
Any chat? None.
Yeah.
Seeing none, at this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.